It started innocently enough, or so I thought. Emma, my girlfriend of 2 years, had always been attached to her phone. She'd scroll through Instagram, message her friends, and laugh at random memes she'd share with me. But lately, something had shifted. I began to notice her laughter becoming more frequent, almost too frequent. It wasn't the kind of laugh she'd share openly anymore. Instead, it was accompanied by a quick tilt of her phone screen, her fingers tapping rapidly as if she were trying to hide something. Whenever I walked into the room, she'd immediately lock her phone or flip it face down on the table, her smile faltering for just a moment before returning. First, I brushed it off. It's probably just her group chat, I told myself, convincing my mind that I was being paranoid. Everyone has their private moments, right? Maybe she was planning some surprise for me or just talking to her friends about something I wouldn't understand. But the nagging feeling wouldn't leave me alone. Over the weeks, her behavior grew stranger. She started spending more time on her phone, her face illuminated by its glow long after we had gone to bed. I'd hear the occasional ping of a notification, followed by her hurried swipes. And when I'd ask what she was doing, she'd offer vague responses like, "Oh, just scrolling," or, "It's nothing important." Still, doubt gnawed at me. Was I being unreasonable? Was I imagining things? I hated the thought of being the jealous, possessive boyfriend. That wasn't me. I'd always prided myself on trusting her, on giving her space. But trust only works when there's transparency. And Emma? She was starting to feel like a stranger in our own home. One evening, the tipping point came. We were sitting on the couch watching a movie, something we used to do all the time. But while I was engrossed in the plot, she was glued to her screen. Her face lit up with a smile, her eyes darting across the screen as if the world outside of it didn't exist. "Emma," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "What's so funny?" She jumped slightly, locking her phone before looking up at me. "Oh, nothing," she said, her tone dismissive. "Just some silly meme from Sarah." I nodded, pretending to accept her answer, but my instincts screamed otherwise. Something wasn't right. That night I couldn't sleep. As she lay beside me, her phone on the nightstand, my mind churned with doubts and questions. What could she be hiding? Why would she act so secretive if it was really just her friends? The unease in my chest grew heavier with every passing minute. The next day, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. It was wrong, I knew that. Invading someone's privacy isn't something I'd ever condone. But the suspicion had grown too loud to ignore. When she left her phone on the counter to grab a glass of water, I took my chance. My hands shook as I unlocked it. She had given me her password months ago, back when there was no reason for doubt. What I saw made my stomach churn. A dating app. Not just any app, but one where she had a full-blown profile. Her pictures I'd taken of her during vacations, dinners, and everyday moments, were posted alongside captions inviting men to connect. And then the messages. Dozens of conversations, each one worse than the last. They weren't just casual chats. She was sending photos. Photos of herself, the kind that were meant to be private, sold to strangers for $50 apiece. Couldn't breathe. My hands gripped the counter as I tried to process what I was seeing. This wasn't just a betrayal of trust. This was a complete destruction of everything I thought our relationship was built on. When Emma walked back into the room, she froze. She must have seen the look on my face, the sheer devastation in my eyes. Her gaze darted to her phone in my hand, and her face went pale. "Explain this," I said, my voice quiet but firm. Her eyes widened in panic. It's not what it looks like," she stammered. "Oh, really?" I shot back, my voice rising. "Because it looks like you've been selling yourself to strangers behind my back." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't having it. "Pack your things, Emma," I said coldly. "You're done here. Get out of my house." She tried to protest, to apologize, to explain. But I didn't want to hear it. Whatever excuse she had, it wasn't enough. And just like that, everything we'd built came crashing down. The days following Emma's departure were a blur of silence and shock. The house felt cavernous without her. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. Every corner of my home was a reminder of her. A photo frame that still held a picture of us smiling at a beach, the coffee mug she always used, even the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the hallway. I wanted to throw everything out, burn it all, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. For the first week, I told myself I was fine. I buried myself in work, gym sessions, and long drives that led to nowhere. But every time my phone buzzed, my heart sank. Each notification felt like it might be her, another apology, another plea. And sure enough, the messages came. "I'm so sorry. Please, just hear me out. I made a terrible mistake, but I'll do anything to fix this. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. I don't want to lose you." First, I ignored them. I couldn't even bring myself to read her long paragraphs, let alone reply. What was there to say? That I was okay? That I'd forgive her? I wasn't okay, and I sure as hell wasn't ready to forgive her. But Emma was relentless. She messaged me every day. If it wasn't through text, it was emails or voice notes. She even sent a handwritten letter, delivered to my mailbox, begging for another chance. "Max," the letter read, "I know I hurt you in ways that words can't fix, but please, believe me when I say I've learned my lesson. I was stupid, selfish, and reckless. Losing you has been the worst punishment I could ever imagine. Please let me prove to you that I can be better." I crumpled the letter into a ball and threw it across the room. But that night, I found myself digging it out of the trash. I reread it, every word sinking into my chest like a stone. The messages didn't stop. She called at odd hours, leaving voicemails where she sobbed, her voice cracking with desperation. "Max, please, I miss you so much. I'm not that person anymore. Just talk to me, please." I'll admit, there were moments when I almost caved. The loneliness was unbearable, and her words stirred something in me. A mix of anger, sadness, and the faintest trace of hope. I missed her, or at least the version of her I thought I knew. But every time I thought about giving her another chance, the memory of her betrayal flashed in my mind. The dating app, the messages, the photos. It was like a punch to the gut all over again. 2 months passed like this, a roller coaster of emotions. I threw myself into distractions, but they only worked for so long. My friends tried to help. Some told me to move on, while others said I should at least hear her out. "People make mistakes, Max," my best friend Ryan said one night over beers. "Maybe she really has changed." Changed? I wanted to laugh at the idea. Could someone change that quickly? Could the person who sold intimate photos of herself to strangers online really become the loyal, trustworthy partner I thought she was? But Emma didn't give up. Her apologies grew more heartfelt, more desperate. She sent me a long video message one evening, her face streaked with tears. "Max," she said, her voice trembling, "I've done so much soul searching since we broke up. I've talked to a therapist, I've quit that app, and I've deleted all my accounts. I've even started going to church again. I'm trying to become someone you can trust, someone you can be proud of. Please, give me a chance to prove myself to you. I'll do whatever it takes." She looked so broken in that video, so different from the confident, cheerful woman I had fallen in love with. It messed with my head. Was she genuinely remorseful? Or was this just another act? One evening, she showed up at my door. It was late, and I was already half asleep when I heard the knock. I opened the door to find her standing there, clutching a bag of my favorite takeout in one hand and a bouquet of sunflowers in the other. "I know you probably don't want to see me," she said, her voice soft, "but I just wanted to bring you dinner. I thought, maybe we could talk." For a moment I said nothing. I could see the raw vulnerability in her eyes, the way she shifted her weight nervously from foot to foot. "Emma," I began, but my voice caught. I sighed deeply and shook my head. "I don't know if I can do this." "Please," she said, stepping closer. "I'm not asking you to take me back right away. Just let me show you that I've changed. Let me earn your trust again." I hesitated, torn between the pain she had caused and the tiny sliver of hope that she might be telling the truth. Against my better judgment, I let her inside. We sat at the table, the takeout untouched between us, and talked for hours. She told me about the steps she had taken to fix herself, the guilt she carried every day, and how much she missed me. I could see the sincerity in her tears, the regret in her voice. By the time she left, my heart was heavier than ever. I didn't know what to do. Could I really give her another chance? Or was I setting myself up for even more heartbreak? That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, Emma's words echoing in my mind. Maybe she had changed. Maybe she hadn't. But one thing was clear. This decision was going to haunt me for a long, long time. After weeks of back and forth, late-night calls, and endless apologies from Emma, I finally made a decision that I wasn't sure was the right one. I forgave her. It wasn't a grand, emotional moment like in the movies. There was no sweeping declaration of love, no dramatic embrace. It was a quiet decision born out of exhaustion, lingering feelings, and a desperate hope that she was telling the truth about wanting to change. She had come over one evening with a small notebook in hand. "What's that?" I asked, eyeing it skeptically. She flipped it open to reveal a list written in her careful handwriting. "These are all the things I've done to make things right," she explained. "I've been seeing a therapist twice a week, deleted all my social media accounts, and even started journaling to keep myself accountable." I stared at the pages, each filled with goals, reflections, and steps she'd taken. It was a lot, and while a part of me remained cynical, another part, the part that still loved her, felt a glimmer of hope. Emma had been relentless in proving herself. She no longer had her phone glued to her hand, and she left it unlocked and out in the open. She started going to therapy regularly, and sometimes she'd share what she talked about in her sessions. She even brought me flowers once, joking, "I know it's usually the guy's job, but I thought I'd switch it up." Bit by bit, I let my guard down. The first time we went out together again felt strange, like we were two people learning to date all over again. We grabbed coffee at the little shop near my place, and for the first time in what felt like forever, we laughed. Really laughed. It wasn't forced or weighed down by tension, it was light and easy, and for a moment I thought maybe we can make this work. Over the next month, things began to feel normal again. She moved back in, and while there were still moments when doubt crept in, she was patient. If I needed reassurance, support the channel by subscribing. It really makes a difference. She gave it without hesitation. If I asked her where she was or what she was doing, she told me without defensiveness. It felt like she was genuinely trying to rebuild what we'd lost. "I'm not the same person I was, Max," she said one night as we sat on the couch watching a movie. "I don't expect you to forget what happened, but I promise you, I'll never hurt you like that again." Her words felt genuine, and slowly, I began to believe her. For a while, life was good. We started going on weekend hikes again, a tradition we'd abandoned during the darker days of our relationship. We spent Sundays cooking together, laughing as we botched recipes and set off the smoke alarm. It felt like we were finally on the same page, rebuilding our relationship on a stronger foundation. But then, about 2 months into this new beginning, Emma came home with news that sent a chill down my spine. "So, I have to tell you something," she started cautiously, setting her bag down and avoiding my gaze. "What's up?" I asked, sensing her unease. "My boss at the restaurant. Well, he said I'm being switched to night shifts for the next few months," she said quickly, as if ripping off a Band-Aid. "It's just temporary, probably 4 months at most." "Night shifts," I repeated, frowning. "Why? You've always worked during the day." She shrugged, sitting down next to me. "Apparently, they're short-staffed at night, and since I'm one of the more experienced servers, they need me to fill in." Something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. Didn't they hire new people recently? Why can't they take the night shifts? She hesitated for a fraction of a second before replying, "I guess they're still in training or something. I don't know, Max. It's just how the schedule worked out." Her explanation sounded reasonable, but a small voice in the back of my mind whispered otherwise. "When does it start?" I asked. "Next week," she said. "It'll be a bit of an adjustment, but I'll make it work. And I promise, I'll keep you updated on everything." I nodded, though the unease in my chest didn't go away. "All right, just keep me in the loop, okay?" Let me know when you're working and when you're heading home. Of course, she said with a smile, leaning in to kiss my cheek. You don't have to worry about anything, Max. I've got this. But I couldn't help worrying. The following week, her night shifts began. She'd leave around 4 p.m. and come home just after midnight. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual. She'd text me during her breaks, letting me know how her shift was going. When she came home, she'd tell me about the rude customers she dealt with or the tips she earned. But as the weeks went on, something felt off. Her stories about work became vaguer, and she started coming home later than usual, claiming she stayed back to help clean up. The texts during her breaks grew less frequent, and sometimes she'd forget to message me altogether. It wasn't like before. There weren't any obvious red flags, but my gut told me something wasn't right. And after everything we'd been through, I couldn't ignore that feeling. So, I did what I never thought I'd have to do again. I started paying closer attention, watching, waiting, and hoping that this time, my instincts were wrong. At first, Emma's night shifts seemed like they would be manageable. She made an effort to keep things normal, sending me texts on her breaks, giving me updates about her coworkers and the customers she dealt with. I tried to convince myself that everything was fine, that this wasn't like before. But as the weeks wore on, cracks began to form. For one, her schedule threw our routines completely out of sync. She'd leave in the late afternoon, right around the time I'd get home from work, and by the time she returned, I'd already be in bed or too exhausted to have a real conversation. Our weekends, which had once been filled with hikes or movie marathons, were now disrupted by her needing to rest from late nights. I feel like we barely see each other anymore, I admitted one Saturday afternoon as we sat at the kitchen table. Emma sighed, rubbing her temples. I know, Max, and I hate it too, but it's just a few more months. We've made it through worse, haven't we? Her words were meant to reassure me, but they didn't. Because while the distance in our schedules was a problem, the real issue was the growing distance between us. Started small. She stopped texting me during her breaks as often, claiming she was too busy or distracted. When I'd ask about her night, her answers were vague, surface level. It was fine, she'd say, or the usual rude customers, bad tips. She didn't tell me the little stories anymore, the ones that made me feel like I was still a part of her life. Then there were the late nights. At first, she'd come home right after her shift, usually around midnight. But soon, her returns became later and later. I stayed to help close up, she'd explain, or we got a rush of customers at the last minute. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But her explanations didn't always add up. One night, she came home smelling faintly of something. Was it cologne? That didn't belong to me. What's that smell? I asked as she slipped off her shoes by the door. She looked down at herself, sniffing her shirt. Oh, probably from one of the cooks, she said casually. He wears way too much cologne. It's like he bathes in it. I nodded, but the knot in my stomach tightened. Things escalated one evening when she called to say she'd be late because her coworkers were grabbing drinks after their shift. Since when do you go out for drinks with your coworkers? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. Max, she said with a sigh. I can't just go to work and come straight home every day. I need some kind of social life too. It's just one drink. I'll be home soon. But soon turned into 2 a.m. When she finally walked through the door, she was visibly tipsy. Her cheeks flushed and her smile a little too wide. You're late, I said, unable to hide the frustration in my voice. She rolled her eyes. I told you I was going out, Max. Why are you making this a big deal? Because it feels like you're shutting me out again. I shot back. You barely text me anymore. You're always vague about work. And now you're out until 2 a.m. without even letting me know? Her face hardened. I'm not shutting you out. I'm just trying to balance work and life, which is already stressful enough without you interrogating me every time I walk through the door. The argument spiraled from there. She accused me of not trusting her, of holding her past mistakes over her head. I told her that trust had to be earned, and she wasn't exactly making it easy. By the end of it, we were both too exhausted to keep fighting, and she went to bed without another word. The next morning, she apologized. "I'm sorry for snapping," she said as we sat across from each other at the breakfast table. "I know I haven't been the best at keeping you in the loop lately. It's just, these night shifts are draining me. I feel like I barely have time to breathe, let alone keep up with everything else." I nodded, but the unease in my chest didn't go away. I wanted to believe her, to support her like she said she needed. But something still didn't feel right. The turning point came a few weeks later when I decided to surprise her at the restaurant. She'd been complaining about how busy her shifts had been, so I thought I'd drop by with some coffee and snacks to brighten her night. When I arrived, the dining room was nearly empty, save for a couple of lingering customers. I spotted one of her coworkers wiping down a table and approached him. "Hey, is Emma around?" I asked. The guy looked at me, puzzled. "Emma?" he repeated. "Oh, she left a while ago. Said she wasn't feeling well." My stomach dropped. "When did she leave?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maybe an hour ago," he said with a shrug before walking off. I stood there for a moment, the coffee growing cold in my hands. She hadn't texted me, hadn't mentioned anything about leaving early. And if she wasn't at work, then where was she? I got back in my car, gripping the steering wheel tightly as my mind raced. All the little inconsistencies, the late nights, the vague explanations, they were starting to add up. For the first time since we got back together, I felt the weight of doubt pressing down on me. And this time I wasn't sure I could ignore it. That night, frustration coursed through me like a relentless storm. I had called Emma 5 times. No answer. I sent text after text, each one growing angrier, more desperate. "Where are you? Why aren't you answering? Emma, this isn't funny. Call me back." Nothing. Not a single reply. The silence wasn't just maddening, it was deafening. It ate away at me, feeding the doubts that had been building for weeks. Was she really out with coworkers? Had she gone home early like her colleagues said? Or was there something else? Something worse? That she wasn't telling me? I couldn't sit still anymore. The house felt suffocating, every wall pressing in on me as my mind spiraled. I needed air, space, something to take the edge off the rage and helplessness clawing at my chest. So I grabbed my jacket and stepped out into the cool night. It was nearly 2 a.m., and the streets were eerily quiet. The world felt frozen in time, as if I was the only person awake, drowning in my thoughts. I walked aimlessly, my breath visible in the chilly air, until I found myself at the park near our house. It was a place we used to visit together, back when things were simpler, when I still believed we were happy. The park was deserted, or so I thought. The glow of the streetlights illuminated the path ahead, casting long, faint shadows across the benches and trees. My mind wandered as I strolled, trying to piece together the puzzle of Emma's lies. That's when I saw them. At first, it was just a vague shape on a bench, half hidden in the shadows. I wouldn't have given it a second glance if not for the movement, a flicker of motion that caught my eye. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. A man sat on the bench, leaning back casually, his posture relaxed. But it was the figure on his lap that made my stomach lurch. A woman. Her legs were draped over his, and she moved in a way that left little to the imagination. Her pants and underwear were discarded on the ground, crumpled and forgotten. For a moment I froze. My brain refused to process the scene in front of me. What kind of person does this? Who would be so brazen, so reckless, as to do something like this in the middle of a public park? But then she turned her head, just slightly. Support the channel by subscribing. It really makes a difference. And the light from a nearby lamppost illuminated her face. It was Emma. My heart stopped. No, this couldn't be real. It had to be some cruel trick of the light, a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I took a step closer, my legs moving as if on autopilot. "Emma," I called out, my voice trembling, barely above a whisper. She froze, her body stiffening as she slowly turned to face me. The man looked up, confused at first, but then his expression shifted to one of annoyance, as if I were the one intruding. "Max?" Emma's voice cracked as she scrambled to cover herself, grabbing at her discarded clothes with shaking hands. I stood there, rooted to the spot, staring at her in disbelief. What is this?" I stammered, my voice rising with every word. "What are you doing?" The man stood, adjusting his pants with an infuriating lack of urgency. "Hey, buddy, chill out," he said, holding up his hands. "This isn't what it looks like." "Shut up," I snapped, my anger boiling over. I wasn't here to listen to excuses from some stranger. My eyes were locked on Emma, searching her face for some kind of explanation, some shred of humanity. Her cheeks were flushed, not with embarrassment, but with shame. Tears welled up in her eyes as she fumbled for words. "Max, I can explain." "Explain," I barked, my voice cracking. "Explain what, Emma? That you've been lying to me? That you're not just selling photos of yourself, but selling yourself?" Her silence was deafening. The man took a cautious step back, muttering something about not wanting any trouble before disappearing into the darkness. I didn't even care. My focus was entirely on Emma, who now stood before me, fully dressed but completely exposed. "How long?" I demanded, my voice trembling with rage. "How long have you been doing this?" She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Her tears fell freely now, streaking her cheeks as she shook her head. "Max, please," she finally whispered. "It's not what you think. I didn't mean for you to find out like this." "Oh, really?" I spat, throwing my hands up in disbelief. "So how was I supposed to find out, Emma? Were you planning on telling me at all? Or were you just going to keep sneaking around, pretending everything was fine while you—" I couldn't even finish the sentence. Her sobs grew louder, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no pity. Just a cold, hollow anger that threatened to consume me. "Was this what the night shifts were about?" I asked, my voice quieter now, but no less cutting. "All those times you said you were working late, staying back to clean up? Was it all a lie?" She nodded, barely, her shoulders shaking as she buried her face in her hands. I took a step back, as if the distance might somehow lessen the weight of her betrayal. But nothing could. The woman I had fought so hard to forgive, the woman who had begged for a second chance, had been lying to me the entire time. Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there in the middle of the park, her sobs echoing in the night. My heart felt like it had been ripped out of my chest, but I kept moving, one foot in front of the other, because if I stopped, I wasn't sure I'd be able to breathe. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a complete and utter destruction of everything I thought we had. And this time, there was no coming back from it. By the time I got home, my emotions had shifted from shock and devastation to something colder, sharper, a need for justice. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, my mind racing. Emma's betrayal wasn't just personal. It was a complete humiliation. I had given her a second chance, opened my heart to her again, and she had stomped all over it. She hadn't just hurt me. She had destroyed the trust we had built, the life we were trying to rebuild together. And for what? A quick buck? The thrill of deception? Whatever it was, I couldn't let it slide. If she wanted to keep secrets, fine. But now I was done keeping hers. The next morning, I started making calls. First to a few of our mutual friends, people who had known us as a couple for years. At first, they were hesitant. "Max, are you sure you want to do this?" My best friend Ryan asked, his voice cautious. "I get that you're angry, but spreading this around, is it really worth it?" "It's not about revenge," I snapped, though deep down, I wasn't sure that was entirely true. People deserve to know who she really is. She lied to me, to everyone. She doesn't get to walk away from this unscathed. I told them everything. How she had been sneaking around, selling explicit photos, and meeting men in secret. I didn't sugarcoat a single detail. At first, I could hear the disbelief in their voices, the awkward pauses as they tried to process what I was saying. "Emma? No way," one of her friends said when I called. "She's not like that. You must have misunderstood." "I saw it with my own eyes," I said bluntly. "Do you want proof?" "Because I have it." That shut her up. It wasn't long before words started spreading. Our mutual friends, coworkers, even casual acquaintances. People began talking. And not just talking, judging, whispering, dissecting her life the way she had once dissected mine with lies. But I didn't stop there. Emma's family had always been kind to me, especially her mom. I hesitated before calling her, knowing this would devastate her. But the memory of Emma's betrayal burned in my chest, fueling my decision. When her mom picked up the phone, her warm, familiar voice only made the conversation harder. "Max, is everything okay? You sound upset. Do you have a minute?" I asked, my voice tight. "Of course. What's going on?" I took a deep breath and launched into the story. I told her everything, from the dating app to the park to what I had witnessed the night before. She listened in stunned silence, the occasional sharp intake of breath the only sign that she was still there. When I finished, there was a long pause. "Max," she finally said, her voice trembling. I don't know what to say. I can't believe Emma would do something like this." "I didn't want to believe it either," I admitted. "But this is who she is now, and people need to know." Her mom started to cry, soft, muffled sobs that made my chest tighten. I wasn't trying to hurt her, but the truth was the truth. Next, I contacted her siblings. They were furious, not at me but at Emma. "How could she do this to you?" "To us?" her older sister said, her voice dripping with anger. "She's an embarrassment to our family." The more people I told, the heavier the fallout became. Emma's carefully crafted image of innocence and sweetness crumbled like a sandcastle in a storm. Friends stopped responding to her messages. Her social media accounts were flooded with comments and questions. Her co-workers whispered about her behind her back. And Emma? She called me over and over again, but I didn't answer. I didn't have the energy or the desire to hear her excuses. One evening, she left me a long, tearful voicemail. "Max, please," she sobbed, her voice hoarse from crying. "Why are you doing this to me? I know I messed up, but you're ruining my life. People won't even look me in the eye anymore. My mom won't speak to me. My boss found out and now I've been suspended. What do you want from me? Haven't you done enough?" Done enough? The sheer audacity of her words made me laugh bitterly. "You did this to yourself, Emma?" I muttered to the empty room. In the weeks that followed, her life continued to unravel. She lost her job at the restaurant after someone tipped off her boss about her side hustle. Her family distanced themselves from her, embarrassed and angry. Even her closest friends began to cut ties, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. One day, I ran into one of her former coworkers at a coffee shop. "Man, Emma really screwed up, huh?" he said, shaking his head. "I don't know what she was thinking. She had everything. A good guy like you, a solid job, and she threw it all away." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. By the end of it all, Emma's life was in ruins. She had lost her job, her friends, her reputation. She was left with nothing but the consequences of her own actions. And me? For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. It wasn't closure, not entirely, but it was enough. I had taken back control of my life, and I wasn't going to let her or anyone else hurt me like that again. The fallout from Emma's actions didn't just shake her life. It completely dismantled it, piece by piece. At first, it was just whispers, judgmental glances, and the quiet rejection from friends and family. But as weeks turned into months, the weight of everything she'd lost began to crush her. Her once vibrant social circle had all but vanished. Emma had always been the kind of person who thrived on connection, who loved being surrounded by people who admired her. But now, the same people who used to laugh with her, go out with her, and shower her with compliments wouldn't even return her texts. She brought it on herself. One of her old friends told me when we ran into each other. I tried to stick by her at first, but the more I learned about what she was doing, I just couldn't. I mean, who lives like that? Her family, especially her mom, was even harsher. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Emma's mom had essentially disowned her. "I didn't raise her to be like this," she reportedly said during a family gathering. "She's an embarrassment to our entire family." The isolation seemed to hit her hard. Emma started reaching out to me more frequently, leaving voicemails and sending long, rambling texts. At first, they were filled with anger and accusations. "Why are you doing this to me, Max? You've ruined everything. This isn't fair. I know I messed up, but you didn't have to destroy my life." But as time went on, the anger faded, replaced by desperation. "Please, Max, I need someone to talk to. I feel so alone. I can't stop crying. I don't know what to do anymore. Max, I don't even know who I am anymore. Please, just talk to me." I didn't respond. What could I say? She had burned every bridge, and I wasn't about to rebuild mine just because she couldn't handle the consequences of her actions. Then came the job situation. After losing her position at the restaurant, Emma struggled to find work. Word of her behavior had spread far and wide, and it seemed like every potential employer had already heard about her scandal. "I can't even get an interview," she confessed in one of her voicemails, her voice trembling. "Every time I apply somewhere, it's like they already know who I am. No one will give me a chance." She tried freelancing for a while, offering her services as a social media manager and graphic designer, but it didn't last. Without a stable client base or a good reputation to rely on, the work dried up quickly. Before long, she was broke. I learned from one of her old co-workers that she had been evicted from her apartment. She was begging the landlord for more time, they said. It was heartbreaking, honestly. She looked so lost, like a completely different person. With nowhere else to go, Emma moved back in with her dad, a man who had never been particularly kind or supportive. The dynamic in that house was toxic, to say the least. Her dad made no effort to hide his disappointment in her, constantly reminding her of how far she'd fallen. "She's a disgrace," he reportedly told a neighbor. "I don't know how she turned out this way, but she's not my problem anymore once she finds another place to live." The breaking point came about 6 months after everything had started to unravel. Emma showed up at the local clinic one afternoon, disheveled and barely coherent. According to the staff, she was crying uncontrollably, unable to string together a full sentence without breaking down. "I can't do this anymore," she reportedly said. "I don't want to be here. I don't want to feel this way." The doctors determined that she was a danger to herself and admitted her to a psychiatric hospital for observation. The news spread quickly, and within days, nearly everyone in our circle knew what had happened. I wish I could say I felt vindicated, that seeing her hit rock bottom brought me some sense of satisfaction. But the truth? Didn't. If anything, it left me feeling empty. I didn't visit her, but I heard bits and pieces from mutual friends. Emma was diagnosed with severe depression and anxiety, conditions that had likely been building for years but were exacerbated by the chaos of her life falling apart. "She's not the same person anymore," one friend told me after visiting her. "She's quieter, like the fight has gone out of her. She spends most of her time staring out the window or crying. It's hard to see." Her treatment included therapy, medication, and group sessions, but progress was slow. The staff at the hospital reportedly encouraged her to focus on taking small steps, building routines, setting tiny goals, but even those seemed monumental for her. "She said she feels like she's in a nightmare she can't wake up from," another visitor told me. "Like no matter what she does, she can't escape what happened." For weeks, I debated whether or not to reach out. Part of me felt like I should. After all, she was still human, still someone I had loved at one point. But every time I thought about picking up the phone, I remembered the lies, the betrayal, and the night in the park. Ultimately, I decided to stay silent. Emma's journey to recovery was hers to take, and I wasn't going to be part of it. As of now, she's still in the hospital, slowly piecing her life back together. Whether or not she'll ever truly recover, I don't know. But one thing is certain. The life she once had, the life we once shared, is gone forever. Months passed, and the storm that had engulfed Emma's life began to settle, leaving behind only the wreckage. She remained in the psychiatric hospital for several weeks, and while I avoided direct contact, I still heard updates through whispers in our social circle and the occasional word from mutual acquaintances. "She's doing better," one old friend told me over coffee. "At least better than she was. But it's slow. She's still carrying a lot of guilt." Guilt. That word stuck with me. It was a heavy thing, guilt, and it seemed like Emma's was enough to bury her. But the truth was, I had my own to carry. Despite everything she had done, despite the lies, the betrayal, and the utter destruction of our relationship, there were moments when I questioned if I had gone too far. Had exposing her to everyone been the right thing to do? Or had I let my anger drive me to become something I wasn't proud of? These questions haunted me, though I never voiced them aloud. Instead, I threw myself into my own life, trying to rebuild what Emma's betrayal had broken. I went back to therapy, a decision I'd initially made to process the first wave of her deceit, but now it became a lifeline. In therapy, I unpacked everything. My anger, my pain, and the twisted sense of satisfaction I'd felt in watching her life crumble. "You've been through a deep betrayal," my therapist said during one session. "It's natural to want justice, to want the truth to come to light. But justice and revenge are not the same thing. What are you really looking for, Max?" I didn't have an answer. Maybe I was still looking for closure, or maybe I was just trying to make sense of everything. Emma, meanwhile, remained a shadow of her former self. After being discharged from the hospital, she moved into a small studio apartment arranged by a social worker. It wasn't much, a single room with a tiny kitchenette and barely enough space for a bed and a desk. But it was hers. I learned from a mutual friend that she had started attending a support group for people dealing with shame and regret. "She talks about you a lot," the friend said hesitantly. "She says losing you was the hardest part of all this." I didn't know how to respond to that. I stayed out of her way, but Emma didn't stay out of mine. Once every few weeks, I'd get a message from her. Short, hesitant texts that always sounded like they came from someone unsure if they even had the right to speak to me. "Hi, Max. I hope you're doing well. I've been thinking about everything that happened. I'm so sorry for the pain I caused you. Thank you for everything you gave me when we were together. I'll always be grateful for that." I never responded. Not because I hated her, but because I didn't know what good it would do. What could I say that hadn't already been said? One day, she left me a voicemail. Her voice was softer than I remembered, almost unrecognizable. "Max, I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, and I don't expect you to. I just wanted to say thank you. For the good times, for the love you gave me, even for the second chance I didn't deserve. I'm trying to be better now, but I know it's too late for us. I hope you're happy. You deserve to be happy." I listened to the message 3 times before finally deleting it. In the months that followed, I started to feel lighter. I reconnected with old friends, went on a few dates, and began to focus on myself for the first time in what felt like forever. I took up new hobbies, hiking, photography, even cooking, and found joy in the simple things again. Emma, from what I heard, continued her slow journey toward rebuilding her life. She found a part-time job at a local bookstore, where the quiet atmosphere suited her newfound need for peace. She stayed out of the spotlight, kept to herself, and avoided social media entirely. One day, while out running errands, I spotted her across the street. She looked different, thinner, older, almost fragile, but there was something else, something softer in the way she carried herself. She didn't see me, and I didn't call out to her. Instead, I watched as she walked into the bookstore, carrying a tote bag filled with books. For a moment, I felt a strange pang of something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't anger or love, but perhaps a bittersweet mix of both. And then I turned and walked away. Emma's chapter in my life was over. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. There was no going back, no fixing what had been broken. But as I walked away that day, I realized something. I didn't need closure from her. I had found it in myself. The weight of her betrayal no longer felt like a burden. It was just a scar, a reminder of what I had endured and survived. And as I stepped into the sunlight, I knew that I was finally free. Support the channel by subscribing. It really makes a difference.